Here we go. Jake and Josh are here to analyze the game they love for the team they love. This is another Dolphins Podcast. Here's your host, Jake Mendel and Josh Houtz.
Thanks for tuning in to another edition of another Dolphins Podcast. I cannot believe it, but rookie minicamps begin in roughly a week, so we're dedicating our show today to short-term expectations for Miami's 2024 draft class, along with some undrafted free agents that might be worth tracking as we work through the offseason. Kat, Houtz, thank you so much both for joining me. And thank you to everyone out there, whether it's via podcast or on the 560 WQAM YouTube channel. We appreciate you listening. Guys, I don't want to start the show by stirring the pot a little bit, but I want to acknowledge we've been getting some great comments on the YouTube. Thank you to everyone who shouted out my new merch I got going on in the back here. But Josh, Kat, I want to ask you guys, because apparently stirred the pot a little bit last week where I didn't think people would get upset about this, so let's talk about it. I said in the pod that I believed that the Miami Dolphins entered the 2024 draft with a need at the interior offensive line position, whether that's a center, whether that's a guard. And we had some comments in the YouTube channel saying that it's not only a need, but it isn't really a concern for the Miami Dolphins. So, Kat, let's start with you. The Dolphins didn't really build the interior of that offensive line during the draft. Should they have?
In my opinion, no. I am not just saying this because the Dolphins picked Patrick Paul in the second round, and that was really all that they did. But I believe that they took the player with the best ability long term. I mean, and my rankings aren't hard to find. I actually had when we did our top 30 show where you take out the guys who definitely were not going to fall to pick 21. I had Patrick Paul 22nd on that list. You tell somebody who's 6'8", 331 pounds. I did make a mistake where I have to admit where I watched the wrong 3 games of him and I called him refined. I went back and I'm like, no, this guy's not refined. His hands and his feet need to get a lot better. But if Butch Barry can take Austin Jackson and take him from the worst offensive tackle in the league to a good player, imagine what he can do with somebody who's 6'8", 331, 3-time all-conference with 36-inch arms. So that's why I like the pick. That's why I always wanted to have someone like Patrick Paul here at the end of the second round, as opposed to somebody like Zach Zinter or Christian Haynes, who I think are just a small upgrade at a non-impact guard position.
Yeah, I mean, the more you watch Patrick Paul, you can see the vision. And like you said, I mean, if they can do it with Austin Jackson, why can't they replicate that success? I think, and the writing was always on the wall, right? Chris Greer admittedly said that we are worried more about the offensive line than they might. We see him plug in these different holes here, whether it's with Isaiah Wynn, whether it's with trying to find Liam Eichenberger home. I mean, I've been on record saying I even like Robert Jones if in a pinch at guard. So I think they have a in-house battle that they're okay with, and they just saw a freak, like you said, a Tyrannosaurus Rex. I'm just going to keep saying that they can, mold into their own and take over for Teron Armstead. So a lot of Dolphin fans wanted that interior offensive lineman, maybe wanted a center. They didn't go that route. I know Baldy was on the pod saying that they didn't think that we had our center on the roster. I think they're going with Brewer. And did I dip out? We can sit here and talk about, what other guys the Dolphins can then bring in to maybe battle it out. So intrigued by this pick and intrigued to see what they have up their sleeves, because this dude being a 6th offensive lineman in a pinch in certain situations, or, being thrown out there when Teron Armstead inevitably gets hurt, I can understand why they went with this pick.
So when we get our cash back in about a month, we're talking June 1st, and you start putting together that grocery list, a guard isn't on it?
Not for me, because I believe that the best one out there is Dalton Risner, if he hasn't been signed in the last 24 hours here. Would he be the best guard on the Dolphins roster? If so, it'd be by a little bit. But I don't think he fits the scheme. That's why, for me, the Dolphins, who I'm going to say is my number one free agent still out there for the Dolphins this year, and that's Calais Campbell. Go rent him for a year.
Wow, where have I been? I like this, though, and I'm totally not against it. And I do like what the Dolphins are doing with the offensive line. We're seeing Mike McDaniel. He's entering his 3rd season. We're starting to see a process from this offense. You look at what the Dolphins are doing at guard. Right now, Isaiah Wynn and Robert Jones are listed as the starters. You have Lester Cotton, who was a free agent back in 2022. Kendall Lamb's sorry, I'm looking at the tackles now, but you have Jack Driscoll. He's been in the league for a little bit. The Dolphins are looking not necessarily for that top tier talent at guard, but they're really trying to identify just veterans, people they know that can come in, at least do the job, whether it's for 3 weeks or 13 weeks, we will see. But I'm starting to agree with you guys that I do think the offensive line is probably closer to set than we might have expected, or at least I might have expected just a month ago. Let's talk about Patrick Paul, and let's get into this, guys. What the Dolphins are going to need out of these players this year. I know we're skipping right over Chop Robinson. I think we can kind of talk about him and Mo Kamara at the same time. But somebody else in the YouTube comments made an excellent point that Teron Armstead, I remember reading stories about him for the Finsider that I think it wasn't until like late October last year when he actually started practicing. He was playing in the games, but he just was not practicing. And then we remember the year before his first season in Miami. Josh, you bring this up all the time that I think it's an excellent point. Teron Armstead, I think he suffered a toe injury where he said he was told he should get surgery and miss the entire season in week 1. So what the Dolphins have here is someone who, Kat, you mentioned it, is raw in Patrick Paul, but let's consider the fact he might get some, second team, arguably first team reps throughout not only the preseason, but the regular season due to Armstead, sitting on ice throughout the week. How quickly could we see someone like Patrick Paul maybe step in and have an impact for this team?
Yeah, I mean, you have to assume that Teron Armstead is going to get about 500 to 600 snaps. And if you give more than that, it should definitely be a bonus. I mean, the odds, I think, of him of playing 17 games, kind of like with Xavier Howard toward the end, the odds are not good. But Patrick Paul, for his size at 6'8", 331, he can really get moving. And that's what Mike McDaniel was looking for. So, yeah, I'm excited about the pick. I wouldn't have liked it in the first round, but I definitely like it in the second.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm going to keep preaching into existence, but when you watch San Francisco, they like to bring in that unbalanced line. They like to, sub him in at tight end. So that's where I want to see Patrick Paul early on. I want to see him in those, short yardage situations that the Dolphins have struggled with, utilize that type of monster and get him those reps, honestly, because I think Kendall Lamb already said he's going to retire, and then Teron Armstead. I mean, the writing's on the wall with him. I don't want to go back to where we were, but I do want to throw out one name for the interior offensive line that I cannot get out of my head, and that's Connor Williams. I don't know. I think maybe even Chris Greer and Mike McDaniel during one of their press conferences, I think they said something about still being in touch with him. So, I mean, that's a guy that can play guard. That's a guy that can play center. So, don't want to get sidetracked here, but that would be my fallback option, break in case of emergency, because he's pretty damn good at both positions. But back to Patrick Paul. Again, this is a guy that's raw. You can see why the Dolphins drafted him, and I'm here for it. I mean, this dude is a absolute behemoth, and I just don't think, in years past I might sit here and be queasy, and part of me is queasy that maybe he won't develop, but with everybody here in place, right? We saw Frank Smith help, Mike McDaniel, Butch Barry, obviously, and the list goes on and on. So Teron Armstead, the veterans. So if Patrick Paul can't put it all together here in Miami, then he just might not be that player that a lot of scouts thought he was.
Shout out Gerald Gilbert for bringing that up in the YouTube comments that Armstead rarely practiced. It is a point worth considering. And both of you guys are in your, I'm not going to hate, or you guys will say mid-30s. Both of you are in your mid-30s. It's safe to say you've gone through a career change. Everybody goes through a career change. But I guess my question I'm trying to get at here is, if Teron Armstead and Kendall Lamb are on the verge of retirement in December and January, and they got to go play in these cold weather games, whether it be, Baltimore, wherever, wouldn't you maybe be a little disappointed? Don't get me wrong, I want the offensive line to be in Teron Armstead's hands if he's healthy, but wouldn't you be a little disappointed by, week 15 or so? Patrick Paul isn't knocking at the door with two guys who are so close to maybe, retiring.
Yeah. So Paul, I think it's kind of a win-win in that situation, because either Teron Armstead's playing at a high level, or Patrick Paul's out there getting some experience. So I think it's okay. I don't think he's an option at guard. And, but the fascinating thing, that we'll see over the next, over this year is, we have talked about the offensive line and protecting Tua and how big of a priority that was. And are we going to get to week 17 or 18 and say, okay, this team made the exact same mistake they did last year? They're not big enough. They're not tough enough. But you've also got the other side of that coin too is, to beat the Chiefs and the Bills and the Bengals and the AFC, do you have to really lean in to this unbelievably fast team on offensive and defense? Because otherwise, if they're not like that, they're not special and they're not going to beat those teams anyway. So that's going to be an interesting tale this season.
Of course, we're going to sit here and wonder what happened, right? I mean, at the end of the year, we're going to sit here to say, are we in the same situation again? You mentioned Patrick Paul. I guess that's his biggest thing, right? His hands. He just needs to work on that. And there's different things that he can fine tune. But I like that option that if we do see Teron Armstead going out there and doing the anomaly and playing a full season, that we can just, have this luxury of, almost, I don't want to say red shirting because we've seen it before, but red shirting a guy like Patrick Paul to be ready when he's thrown out there, because we've seen worse. If he is thrown out there in a pinch, I feel like Dolphin fans over the last few years have been, we've been prepared for this situation. I feel like we've seen a lot worse out there than Patrick Paul. So let's see what Butch Berry has up his sleeve. We heard that he's going to be in a dungeon. Mike McDaniel joked, just fine tuning things. Let's see it happen. This is his Frankenstein.
I don't want to doubt Jalen Phillips. I would never, ever, ever do such a thing, but I think it's reasonable to expect early in the 2024 season, the Dolphins are going to have to lean into an edge rush duo that features Chop Robinson and Shaq Barrett. So, Kat, how do you feel about a scenario where the Dolphins are leaning on those two guys early? What instantly goes into your head?
I love the edge position right now as it sits because the Dolphins have poured a lot of resources into it. I mean, and Jalen Phillips, hope he's ready early in the season, if not week one. Chubb will probably be later. And now you add Chop Robinson, who is a different pass rusher. I mean, Jalen Phillips and Bradley Chubb have really good speed off the edge. Chop Robinson has safety, cornerback speed off the edge. And I know he only got 4 sacks last year, but he had a pressure rate of 20.8. So when you're picking 21st in the NFL draft, you kind of got to be a little bit open-minded. You can't have just one guy. So my board at that time, the top 3 guys were Quinyon Mitchell 1, Jackson Powers Johnson 2, barely, and then Chop Robinson was 3. So I was elated with that pick there, and people are all over the board on him. Lance Zierlein and Jeff Legwold from ESPN and their rankings, they had him as the 12th player in the draft. Trevor Sikkema from PFF had him as the 40th. So he kind of goes all over the place because he's not quite a finished pass rusher, but he's one of the fastest you'll see.
Yeah, and I think that's what you kind of have to like, and I guess in a way dislike. A lot of these guys you're not seeing on tape right now, what the finished product is. So that's why a lot of Dolphin fans are like, oh man, I wanted X, Y, and Z. We saw the Steelers snipe our dude right from underneath, our noses, right? So I'm with you. The more you watch Chop Robinson, that first step is just, you mentioned it. It's just absurd how quickly he gets into the backfield and can disrupt. And everyone looks at sacks, but it's him opening things up for everyone around him, and that's what I'm intrigued to see what Anthony Weaver has up his sleeves all season long. We kind of saw these coaches, probably didn't actually happen this way, but it seemed like they were each getting their own little, players throughout, right? We saw Danny Crossman get some players here and there. I can, go on and on, but it seems like maybe this might be that Anthony Weaver piece where he can move him all over. Again, you literally see this dude can actually drop back. You don't want him in coverage, but he can do just about everything. And just to think about where he can line up, I do have to go back and say that I misspoke on the previous pod. I said, people say lined up at nose tackle, and it's just in that that they're just no look blitz situation. You go back and look at 2022, he was legitimately, lined up there in the interior, disrupting things. So you're intrigued by it the more you watch it. And I just cannot, again, I'm glad I said it at the time, but Mike McDaniel, he has an obsession with pass rushes with the defensive line. And as we'll talk about as we go on, there's another guy that is from Colorado State, like Shaq Barrett, that could make an impact as a pass rusher. So I'm all on Chop Robinson. Love that his nickname's Pork Chop. Love that he doesn't know how to cook, and intrigued to see what the Dolphins get out of him, because this dude is an athlete, an absolute stud.
One thing I want to jump in on that you said there, Josh, too, is that the difference with Chop Robinson compared to Jared Verse and Laiatu Latu is I think he gives you the option when Chubb and Phillips are healthy to give you this car crash type of blitz look, because he has shown the ability to, I'm not going to say play nose tackle, like you said, that you didn't say, I should have said, but he has shown the ability to move a little further in on the defensive line and get his arms up and not get steamrolled. I'm not saying he should play there full time, but to me, there are some options when Chubb and Phillips are both in there too, for getting them all on the field at the same time.
Speaking of car crash, let's just talk about him. Mo Kamara. I mean, there's nobody more violent in this draft class than this dude for the Miami Dolphins. Cap, basically, I kind of tried to shake my crystal ball here, and I kind of have a feeling that Kamara is going to be the guy, whether it's a preseason game, whether it's week 2. He's going to have a monster performance like right away, and everyone's going to be wondering, like, why did we draft Chop Robinson? What's going on here? Before he kind of settles in here. Am I on the right track here with someone like Kamara?
Yeah, I've got to say, the Dolphins' top 4 picks, I don't know if I've ever, as a Dolphins fans, really liked their first 4 picks, all of them. And Mo Kamara was their 4th. And yeah, somebody who had 13 sacks and 17 tackles for loss last year for Colorado State. I mean, and his flaws are pretty clear. He's short. He's 6 foot, and he's got short arms. He's not, for his size, he's not a 4.38 guy who's, like Dwight Freeney was, who was, 5'11", 6 foot tall, but he's still plenty fast. And I think people are going to look back and see that, okay, he wasn't 6'2" or 6'3", he was, 6 foot and a half, and they're going to think that's silly. So again, another player that teams were all over, that was all over teams' boards. Rob Rang from Fox News, or from Fox Sports, had him 57th on his overall board. So a second round prospect. And then 5 other analysts had him off their top 100 completely. So all over the place on this guy.
Yeah, I'm really just starting to dive into the tape now, but I mean, you can see why the Dolphins drafted him and took that dart. I mean, again, it seems like Mike McDaniel absolutely loves the pass rushers, and this guy just has that chip on his shoulder, can just pin his ears back and use strength and a little bit of speed. It's not like Chop Robinson, like you mentioned. I mean, and we do got to throw out with Chop Robinson. I mean, Kat, you've said time and time again, this dude can just go out there and seek Josh Allen if we need him to. But Mo Kamara, man, I mean, this is a guy who I think that with the right coaching can develop, and you have to love the feel-good stories, right? We come on here and Jake and I are joking, we need to come up with a club for all these mid-wide receivers that I've stand over the years. But this is a guy, Kamara basically just came out and said, all these other teams are going to regret passing on me. And I think Jake and I joke, he's
Dolphins.
like, thank you, the lovely Mr. Dolphins or something like that. So can't wait to see what he can do. And again, with the injuries, we all sit here and hope Jalen Phillips is out there early on, but let's be honest, we're looking at that, glass half full, right? I think that's the way to say it. But we don't know if him and Chubb are going to be out there. We're going to see Chop Robinson early on. Maybe Kamara goes out there and can disrupt the quarterback. So intrigued to see him early on, see some of these camp battles with some of the offensive linemen, joint practices, things like that. But this guy, when you put on the tape, he definitely catches your eye as one of the playmakers of that Colorado State defense.
The Dolphins have 2 former Colorado State University edge rushers who won Mountain West Defensive Player of the Year on the roster. Mo Kamara and Shaq Barrett. I was super hyped to find that little stat. Shaq Barrett also went undrafted. So you see the process. You see that there's a real pathway for Kamara to, I mean, it's insane to ask anyone to have a 10-year NFL career, but for a pathway to playing time and be an impact player for a 5th round pick, you definitely see it for Kamara. Kat, what was your reaction? You're sitting there day 2 of the NFL draft. I think there was nothing less obvious, or excuse me, I should say more obvious than Miami wanting to spend a 3rd round pick. They were just waving it in the air. We want to spend this. What was your initial reaction when you heard them trade up with the Eagles? And then did it change when you heard it was for running back Jaylen Wright?
My initial reaction was I didn't like it because I wanted them to keep those picks for next year. But it had to have been a couple of players for me to like it. If they had traded up for somebody and then it turns out to be a Hunter Long type of pick in the middle rounds, it'd be like, what the heck are we doing here? But when Jaylen Wright was the pick, even though it's a running back, I absolutely loved it. And I would have loved it as this if the same guy was taken as a 3rd rounder next year. Mm-hmm. So one thing maybe we didn't talk about enough is that the Dolphins use a lot of 2 running back, sometimes 3 running back looks. So there are opportunities for him to get on the field. And you just look at the player. I mean, it kind of gives me Lamar Miller vibes in terms of what he can do. 7.4 yards per carry last year for Tennessee in the SEC. So, now if you get into a situation where Devon Achane isn't touching the ball 250, 300 times, which he shouldn't be anyway.
Agreed.
Now you might be able to put somebody very similar to him, but not quite as fast in there.
Yeah, that's an interesting comparison. I know a lot of people like to go off those RAS scores, and I actually had someone tag me because I think Player Profiler had his comp as like Miles Sanders, and I think Brees Hall was mock draftable, but someone tagged me in a RAS score, and it was side by side, and him and Lamar Miller was spot on. So interesting comparison there. I think what really stood out to me when watching the tape was, he does have that big play ability, but it's not like quite like a Devon Achane where he's just gonna completely outrun you, but he brings more of that speed. And the thing that the physicality. And the thing I really liked was how, I guess willing he was in the pass game, right? As a pass protector. I mean, he was in there getting down and dirty, taking on blocks, and doing things that some of these other backs on the roster don't do. So we know Mike McDaniel loves the run game, came from San Francisco. They just seem like they continue to, get the chamber reloaded, right? There's a new running back coming in. We got Jaylen Wright now. So I'm going to continue to call it. Well, I didn't even start calling it this, but we had Ronnie and Ricky. I'm going to somehow translate this to our new Ronnie and Ricky with Wright and Achane. I know I'm reaching there, but I'm intrigued by it, man. Intrigued because they saw this guy as that person that they wanted to go up there and give up a 3rd round pick, right? I mean, they have a vision for him, and you got to be excited about that.
We can't conclude this conversation without talking about Miami's final 2 picks. The Dolphins are about to go through a transition. They're going to have to pay Tua. They're going to have to pay Jalen Waddle, Jalen Phillips. Both their 5th round options were just picked up. Javon Holland is right there. Money isn't going to come as easy, aka you're not always going to draft in the top 6 to pick Jalen Waddle, aka you're not going to be able to spend 2 first-round picks and a boatload of money to draft Tyreek Hill. But guys, you're hoping if you have Tua, if you have a guru in Mike McDaniel, you can find value elsewhere. And I don't want to overhype 6th and 7th round picks too much, but I genuinely believe the Miami Dolphins might have found impact players in Washington Squared.
Yeah, I mean, talking about players that fell, it seems to be a common theme throughout this draft. I mean, Malik Washington, again, on my the consensus board that I have, I do it. I have 13 different analysts: the Mel Kipers, the Trevor Sickamas, the Daniel Jeremiahs. 9 out of the top out of those 13 analysts had Malik Washington as a top 100 player in the draft. 9 out of 13, and the Dolphins got him at pick 184, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
You're talking about somebody who is, I know he's limited. I know he's a slot guy. He's not the fastest guy in the world, but somebody who caught 110 passes last year for Virginia. I mean, that offense ran through Virginia. So now you put him out there in the slot. I mean, yeah, he could be your 3rd receiver. So I'm pumped about that one for sure.
Yeah, I mean, we're sitting here trying to come up with a club. I mean, Malik Washington might be a tier above some of these guys I've stand. I'll get into Taj Washington in a second, but Malik Washington, I mean, we say he's only a slot receiver, but that's kind of what this Dolphins offense needed, right? I mean, he's going to be that guy that can settle underneath some of those zone coverages and be that security blanket. And I'm just wondering how these defenses are going to game plan, because Malik Washington absolutely has that explosive playmaking ability, but not quite as much as Taj Washington. And I don't know how you feel about him, but this guy, the thing I like most about him, again, it's almost like Jaylen Wright, where he's, this dude is 5'9", 174 pounds. He's very small, but he's out there just taking on blocks, getting in guys' faces, not scared to do those little things, play special teams, things like that. And that's what's going to inevitably get them on the roster. So I love what we have in Malik Washington. I know everyone's hyped up about him, but when I'm watching Taj Washington, I'm trying to, settle my excitement, because he is that, he's a little bit of a later pick. He's that guy that everyone's kind of overlooking. And I think he does have that big play making ability and can be a slot receiver as well. So I like both these guys. I know they're both probably not going to make the roster. Maybe one lands on the practice squad, but to find these guys late in the draft, like you mentioned, that's absolutely absurd. So intrigued by this, but like you mentioned, man, Malik Washington is going to be a real difference maker in this offense.
I've got to say, Taj Washington, almost 1,100 yards last year. I know he had Caleb Williams throwing to him, but again, another player I didn't think would be in the 7th round. And somebody that after he ran a 4.52, I thought he was going to be a little bit faster than that. So I feel like he plays faster than 4.52 that he ran. And I've got to confess that, when the Dolphins took Patrick McMorris out of California in the 6th round, that was the first player in the draft that I had never heard of. I
do have to hand up. My bad. I completely just skipped over him during our recap too.
See, exactly.
Is there a legitimate pathway, you think, Kat? Have you gotten a little chance to stew on McMorris here out of California? I mean, he led the team with 6 pass breakups, played in all 13 games, 5.5 tackles for a loss, 2 forced fumbles. Is there a success story somewhere buried here?
I did watch him a little bit, really in the box safety,
Mhm.
and somebody who's going to be competing for a roster spot. I'd expect him to compete with Elijah Campbell for that final
Mhm.
safety spot, play some special teams. So yeah, I mean, honestly, even me, when you get down to the late sixth round, seventh round, I'm either happy with the pick or shocked that they fell there, like Malik Washington and Taj Washington. Or I think there's not much separating that player from the undrafted free agents.
Yeah, I'll be the first one to admit I have yet to watch McMorris. And I think it's funny, Jake, when we first did the pod, I had the Dolphins official site up and they had some, little tidbits about some of these players. They had nothing on them. Now, at least they have some information. So I don't know if Chad Reuter went in there and like tweaked his thing, like, oh shit, I got to add this player. No one knows who he is or what. But definitely, I'm going to sit here and we're going to throw out Kader Kohou, right? I mean, he's one of those undrafted guys that, they kind of sat here and found a way. So obviously, this dude's not undrafted, but yeah, I think he's just going to be a casualty later in the year. But hopefully, I mean, we're rooting for him, right? Rooting for all these guys because they're getting their NFL dream. It's finally coming true.
Yeah, maybe Brandon Jones replacement, something like that. Somebody you can work into the mix with a little physicality. I don't like to use this word because I think it's overused quite a bit, but Turbo Taj is a dog. This dude is going to be so much fun to watch. My favorite quote I had from him is that he absolutely loves being on special teams. The coaching staff is asking him, "Hey, you got to take off some sort of plays here." So I'm going to be very curious to see how he's incorporated and overall how the Miami Dolphins really improved their special teams unit, mixed in with a new kickoff rule and all that fun stuff. But guys, let's dive into a couple undrafted free agents here. And I don't even want to bury the lead here. Kat, how long until I should confidently buy a Storm Duck jersey?
Storm Duck, what a name. I'll tell you what, and it gives me kind of, the Dolphins gave him a $150,000 signing bonus, I believe. It was over 100,000. And that number I always look at because that type of player typically makes the team or is a player that they almost drafted. Same that Robert Jones got that. He made the team. He might start this year. Kader Kohou got that. Is obviously has played a lot of snaps. So now you got Storm Duck for a guy that's 6 foot tall, 195 pounds, runs a 4.42, and he definitely has the measurables. I mean, there's no doubt about that. And he's somebody that transferred from North Carolina. Watching him at North Carolina as well as at Louisville, I thought he was a little bit grabby, but I'd rather have a pup that can bite, and then you have to train him as opposed to the opposite.
Nice.
Or a duck that can bite.
I was gonna say, he said pup. I said it was right there, man. Yeah, I mean, I just wonder how he fell there, right? I mean, how many teams had interest in Storm Duck? Clearly the Dolphins paid him that money because there were other teams involved, right? Why did he fall? Like, why did he completely fall out of the draft? I mean, when you're watching the tape, like Kat said, he can be a little bit grabsy, but this guy, he has the tools there. You can see why a team would take a chance on him, why the Dolphins would give him that type of money. And I sat here and said, well, McMorris was going to be the next Kader Kohou. Storm Duck was right in front of me, right? So we're all rooting for a dude named Storm Duck. I mean, that's just the most badass name possible. And yeah, I'm here for it. I'm here for a Storm Duck in that secondary.
Nick Needham, similar scenario. Yeah, I really, that's probably one position. I think running back too, cornerback and running back are two positions I'm very confident in Miami's ability to develop over time just because they've proven it quite a bit. Guys, feel free to jump in with names here, but one I wanted to bring up is Byron Matos out of South Florida because Tom Pelissero originally tweeted that this dude never played a snap of football in his life. And I wish I said something. I write a bunch of stories each week for the Finsider. So I do everything I can to double check, triple check any information I have. It took me about 10 seconds to figure out that he didn't play much, and I'm not trying to be that guy, but he had snaps playing special teams. He had a couple snaps in the regular season in 2022, I think it was. Otherwise, I thought this was going to be a very, very fun story, a former basketball player, but he did start dipping his toes into football, so he's got a little bit of football background, but considering a $225,000 signing bonus, we'll see what this guy can do. Interesting story.
Very much. I mean, like you said, Jake, he never played football till 2022. Played basketball at New Mexico. Went to South Florida. played basketball there, walked on, never played a snap of football in his life. And then he's out there in 2023 starting for them at tackle. And, South Florida is not a huge school, but it's not, like Lindenwood where I went. I mean, it's bigger than that. So yeah, no, I mean, you're looking for guys who are toolsy prospects here. I mean, take a look at just in the history, Jordan Mailata played rugby, didn't play football, but had the physical tools to develop, and he developed quickly. George Fant is not everybody's favorite player, but this is a guy, I don't think he played college football at all. If he did, he played for a year or two like this guy. So no, I like this. This is the typical guy that you want to stash on the practice squad. And I got to give you a shout out too, Jake. I mean, we did our mock draft, and you were the only person that you didn't pick the correct round because that guy went undrafted, like we're talking about. But Grayson Murphy from UCLA could have easily gone in the 6th or 7th round. He was UCLA's third end. Gabriel Murphy, his brother, was the second end, and Latu was first. So somebody who's a little bit limited, a little bit smaller than his frame would indicate at 6'2", 249, plays a little bit smaller, but always gives maximum effort, and does have 4.6, 340 speed. So he certainly has a chance to come in here and compete, at least for if not a roster spot, then for a practice squad.
I think Pro Football Focus had Murphy as like leading the league in quarterback pressures, and I think something we talked about too is he had some great edge rushers with him, so there was definitely some opportunities there. I think it was Lance Zierlein. I'm super sorry if it wasn't, but kind of said that he also gets into a little trouble after the play's over. He likes to kind of keep things going a little too long, so it'll be interesting to see. I liked the name, but God, when you add someone like Mo Kamara along with Chop Robinson, it's going to be an uphill battle for someone who he kind of seemed like he wouldn't necessarily have any sort of ceiling to him, but he could at least come in and establish a decent floor where you wouldn't have to really work with them, and you'd be comfortable snaps out of him. But obviously it could be as quick as 6 games, 7 games. The opponents have film on him and can beat him one way or another.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll see if a lot of these guys are going to get on the practice squad, and you should see 1 or 2 of them on the active roster. I mean, just look at last year. I mean, Julian Hill makes the 53-man roster, stays there all year. Brandon Peely goes back and forth between the active roster and the practice squad. Ethan Bonner gets on the field late in the year. I mean, so some of these guys are we're going to be seeing them on Sundays. There's no doubt about it. And another guy is Mark Perry, the safety from TCU. I mean, this is a guy that I believe would have been probably a 4th or a 5th round pick if he didn't have 0 interceptions in college. Now, shame on him for not having a pick, but 6 foot, 213, TCU safety, didn't have a penalty at TCU in his final 2 years. Yeah, I mean, I think that's somebody that could easily leapfrog Patrick McMorris or Elijah Campbell for that final safety spot too.
Yeah, and I'm not going to sit here and act like I'm experts on any of these guys, but you mentioned the tackle, the athlete from USF, but they also brought in Matthew Jones, interior offensive lineman from Ohio State, and then Andrew Meyer from UTEP. So those are some guys that can battle, maybe bring you some depth there. But, people might hate me, but the thing that I guess the play that really stood out to me was the quarterback, Gavin. Not the thing that really stood out to me because Storm Duck looked nice. A lot of these guys I'm intrigued by, but the Dolphins brought in a quarterback that looks like he, can sling the rock. I think he's coming off Tommy John surgery, but just an intriguing name to watch throughout rookie camp, throwing the ball around, and who knows what can come of that. But we're rooting for all these guys, right? I mean, you mentioned Mark Perry, Storm Duck's probably going to make the roster. We'll take anybody at offensive line. Lots of acorns, and we love our acorns here in Miami.
Sorry if I said this wrong too, but I wanted to make sure I got the money right. For Matos, it was a $22,000 signing bonus with $225,000 salary guaranteed, according to Aaron Wilson. Guys, I think it'd be fun to wrap up here. I have the list of Miami's future contracts. If we're talking about acorns, let's talk about some of these year 2 guys, maybe at a little impact. So if I go through the list here, Quentin Bell, Ethan Bonner, Tanner Connor, Ryan Hayes, Chazen Hayes, Brandon Peely, Braylon Sanders, and Anthony Schwartz. Are there any names that really stick out that you could maybe see taking that year 2, maybe for some of these guys, year 3 lead now that they've been developing? Yeah,
good question. If I had to pick one out of that group, I'd say Ryan Hayes. I was disappointed that the Dolphins cut him initially, and then I believe he went to the Colts for a while, and then he came back to the Dolphins and was on the practice squad. I liked what I saw from him in preseason. I didn't like him in the last draft when he was projected as a 3rd or 4th round guy, but when he falls to the 7th, and then he shows well in camp, and then in front of 100,000 people in Michigan his final year, he doesn't allow a sack. Yeah, I mean, we could certainly work with that. And I do see a little more ability out of him than I thought I otherwise would have.
Yeah, man. I'm not going to sit here and put my, Houtz stamp approval on any of these guys, because I'm a little worried about.
Not even Ethan Bonner?
That's what I was going to say. I was going to say Ethan Bonner. I was setting up for that. But so my pick would have been Ethan Bonner. I just don't know that with some of these guys we're talking about, Storm Duck. I mean, you could keep Storm Duck over Ethan Bonner perhaps. So he does have the system. Well, he had the system down. So we'll see. Ethan Bonner was going to be my answer, but I'll be the first one to admit I forgot some of the names you mentioned. Who do you got, Jake? You're probably going Bonner. I'd love for it to be Tanner Connor, though.
I kind of am open. I'd like to see Anthony Schwartz get a chance to do kickoffs in this new system. I think that could get really interesting with his speed. No speed is created equally, but I think he could really have an impact. Even if it's just special teams, he's been trying to make it work for a few years. I think him and Braylon Sanders, 2 guys who I think will have to really watch early in training camp, because you have Washington squared right on their heels trying to steal those spots.
Yeah, Anthony Schwartz, I'm not being rude here and texting. I'm trying to look up his game log, because I vaguely remember, I think it was against the Chiefs, where I think a few years ago at the beginning of the year, he had like 100-yard game, and people thought, okay, he was a 3rd round pick at one point. And people, I don't know the exact game, but people thought, okay, this guy's got game-changing speed out there. And then he just fell off the face of the earth. So, you know that he would eventually find his way to Mike McDaniel if he was fast. Same thing with Braylon Sanders. Same thing with a lot of these other guys here. Especially Jaylen Wright in the 4th round.
Do we think this is it for the wide receiver group? I think one thing we wanted them to sign is maybe that bigger boundary wide receiver, even if it was Odell Beckham, just someone who can kind of win on the outside, so you could get Tyreek and Jalen Waddle working in the slot a little bit more. But when we're talking about, either the Washingtons, whether it's somehow Anthony Schwartz really steps up, those are all guys who, for the most part, are going to be in the slot. Is that one of those needs, you think, just to kind of wrap it up and bring it to the top of the show? Should that be at the top of Miami's to-do list, do you think?
For me, no. I kind of look forward to the competition here at receiver, because, what also needs to be factored in is, the Dolphins have a fullback. So he needs to get on the field. Devon Achane is going to, probably be more involved in the passing game. Jaylen Wright is one of the best pass protecting running backs in this draft. He's going to get on the field quickly. Jonnu Smith is a move tight end and a big slot guy. I think the Dolphins have more than enough. I think if you put Odell Beckham and Tyler Boyd in here, and they won't be too expensive, but they won't be cheap. Right. I think that's too many cooks in the kitchen at that point.
Yeah, I had to make sure I wrote Jonnu Smith's name down, because I wanted to make sure I said that. And like we've been talking about as a 3rd option, like Kat said, you want to get these running backs more involved. So I don't think that's at the top of your list, but I mean, we probably didn't think Odell Beckham was at the top of our list, a few months ago. And clearly the Miami Dolphins thought it was that need. So I'm okay if that's what they decide to do with some of that extra money, because at this point, I mean, you can use as much of this cap as we need to this year, right? Once June 1st comes, use that if you have to toy around, but I absolutely do not think you need Odell Beckham. And like Kat said, I'd rather see the Washingtons battle or see one of these other guys get involved, because there's only so many, targets to go around, because you don't want 2 out there slinging the rock any more than he needs to, especially when you're building up this run game. And that's all I got to say.
Josh, you've been posting some awesome clips on Twitter of a lot of these draft guys. Hey, what's the best nickname you've heard for the Washingtons so far? I really want to lean into Washington squared, but I'm just curious if you heard anything that was a little spicy.
No, I didn't. Nothing yet. No, mine was Taj, don't call me Malik Washington, and Malik, don't call me Taj Washington. That was the best I came up with, but I kept that to myself. So I'm still working on it. I like Washington squared.
Washington Monuments, I heard.
Yeah, I have no clever nickname, but I mean, we've got to name them something when they both get cut on the same day. No, I think I think I agree with you guys. I think one or both are going to make the roster. Malik Washington it would be my favorite there.
Washington football players. I heard that one. I thought that one was pretty funny too. But yeah, let us know. Let us know your thoughts about what the Washington should have for a nickname. I don't say this often, but guys, if you have a little time and could leave a rate review wherever you listen to this podcast, it'd be greatly appreciated. It helps others find the show, especially in these months when everyone is craving that football content as we inch closer to the regular season. But that is it. That is all the time we have this week. Hope everyone out there has a wonderful weekend. Kat and Houtz, thank you both so much for joining me. We will talk to you next week, but until then, fins up.
Fins up.
Fins up.